thank you for the invitation to come and be a part of this conversation, to be a part of this dialogue. And we're going to frame it as a dialogue. And the reason why it's a dialogue is because the book is about, it has a history in it, a specific history, right? But it is also a call to action. And part of what we'll really be emphasizing in this conversation is that call to action. And I think that is that whole idea about how one thinks about the past, and then how one uses the past to fuel or energize our need to project into the future. And so I've known about this book for a while and been a fan of this book for a while. So when I got the invitation to be in a conversation about this book and be in a conversation with Margaret, I was ecstatic. And so I'm really excited about it. And so what I'd like to do is to start off with by allowing you to bring some additional people into the room.
Thank you. I am so honored to be here today and be for this. My husband Bob and I, it's our favorite second to be. Speak up. It's our second favorite place to be. How's that? Yeah. I love feedback, by the way, so I appreciate that. I do. So what I'd like to do is start off with the names of the earliest recorded enslaved people sold by my family in the Low Country. Phoebe, Billy, Phyllis, Kay, Jimmy, Hannah, Sarah, Affie, Rosie, Hercules, Cicero, Cujo, Sambo, Samson, Bristol, Juno, Holly, Mary, and Dinah. And these 19 individuals, these 19 human beings, were sold by my fifth great-grandmother, who had been widowed, and sold by my fourth great-grandfather, William Payne. Hence, the connection for the first and second generations of slave trading in my family. They are real people.
And if I could add to that, the Maries of the Santee, my Low Country ancestors that toiled in enslavement in this region. And I don't know, I'm at a loss for words because I feel those spirits and I feel the debt that we owe to those people. But I also understand the hope and the way forward that those folks have left us. And I think that this is powerful because normally when you introduce a book, the biography of the author is one thing, and the synopsis of the book is a second thing. In your situation, it intersects. Your biography and the book itself are at a crossroads. And can you say a little bit more about that?
Well, it's really interesting. I'll be 73 this year, and this was not where I was planning to spend my retirement. I was never interested in history. I am from what I believe a working class family in Charleston, and I thought that my family had come there in 1850s. And I found out recently that they had come much earlier than that. I show a picture of McLeod Plantation. How many of y'all have gone to McLeod Plantation on James Island? If you haven't, it's only an hour and a half up the road. I highly recommend it. It's the only plantation in Charleston that tells the story of plantation life exclusively from the viewpoint of the African Americans. So when I was a child, my mother had married up, as we say. And she married a man who was originally, his family came from Savannah. And he was a big golfer, and so he built a house in 1947 in the Country Club of Charleston, adjacent to McLeod Plantation. So his children little white kids in my neighborhood, about 10 of us, would sneak over the plantation, and one day we discovered cabins next to that big house. And outside of the cabins were these little kids. They were skinny just like we were. I mean, we looked very much the same, except for they had dark skin and we had lighter skin. And they were literally playing in dirt. They had no toys. They didn't have a golf course. They didn't have a tennis court. They didn't have a small boat marina. They didn't have a big swimming pool or a big clubhouse. All they had was that little brick cistern that you see in the center of the dirt road. And there was a pump on the top of that cistern back in the 50s. And they were pumping their water for their cabins, sloshing inside the buckets into the cabins because they had no indoor plumbing. And basically, the last person who rented one of those cabins moved out in 1990. So if we think this is ancient history, that's not too ancient for me. So all my life, I believed I was from working class people that had nothing to do with slavery, and I felt really good about having nothing to do with it. Although I went to school with some people who family did. But, and this is my grandmother. She lived to be 100. 1882 to 1983. And when she died, and I was very close to her, I stayed at her house a lot. She left 2 handwritten pages of notes that had some names of people that were out of the family Bible that she had recorded, and it said that a lot of these people were from New York. Well, she died in 1983, and I will tell you, I'm Charlestonian. I was born and raised, and I was not interested in having any cousins from New York. Don't think that bias or prejudice was just for race. It was also for geographic section of the country. So I left it all alone for 35 years until I went back and looked at an old DNA test 6 years ago, and there was a message from my cousin. And my cousin asked me, would I please trace our history and find where we were connected. And so that's what I did, and that's how all of this started. And so these are my cousins from St. Augustine, Florida. And if you study history, you will know that in the 1700s, when my family came in 1758, that St. Augustine was deeply connected to Charleston. Charleston was St. Augustine.
Wow.
It was big.
So, in his 1946 book, A Natural History of Nonsense, Bergen Evans wrote that we may be through with the past, but the past is not through with us. And to kind of sit with that idea of the ways in which the past kind of both creates echoes, it creates a roadmap in some ways that we're not even aware of, but that somehow sometimes becomes illuminated and offers us forks in the road, transformations in our journey, and to think about ways in which, and sometimes how some folks take the past as a invitation to create new distortions, to create new to try to revive old hatreds, to try to scale back, turn back on some of the forward movement that we've made. And I'm not just talking about Tuskegee Airmen here. And so I'm thinking about now the ways in which the tragedy at Mother Emanuel and the church helped to sort of catalyze, to put you into action, and to kind of bring you out of what you thought was retirement.
That is past tense. So when the Mother Emanuel massacre happened, I had been a consultant, a leadership development consultant for the City of Charleston Police Department for 5 years. And what I consulted in was helping them see complexity. So if you had talked to the police department before 2010, they would have said their job was to enforce the law, right? And they were spot on. There's more though. Over time, if you just enforce the law without community support, you get some really disastrous results. So the work that I did was help people see the power of this little word called and, A-N-D. And because I'm from Charleston, I can make that a 3-syllable word. That's and. And so the Charleston Police Department had been working for 5 years on both enforcing the laws and making sure they were supported by the community, that they were not alienated or vilified in the community. So on the night of June the 17th in 2015, when the young man came into the Bible study, prayed with these people, and then murdered 9 of them, people from the black community came downtown and they were bearing arms. And Chief Mullen, our wonderful police chief who just retired from Clemson, told people, talked to the people, didn't tell them, told the people that he needed their help and asked them if they would give him some time to sort things out. And that was really important that night. What became even more important is that I had been elected and appointed by the governor to serve on the board of the International Airport there in Charleston. And our board decided that we had a $200 million, which doesn't sound like much money now, sounded like a lot 10 years ago, from a renovation of our airport. And they wanted to some way to memorialize what had happened at Mother Emanuel. Because they said it didn't just happen to the church, it happened to our community, and we needed to let the locals know it, and then the millions of visitors that come through our airport annually. And so my husband Bob, if you'll raise your hand, hey, Bob and I got to work with 2 of the survivors of the Mother Emanuel massacre, Miss Polly Shepard and Miss Alicia Sanders, for months. And that was life-changing for both of us, to be so close to people who had basically had their lives blown away right in front of their very eyes. And it just seemed, we started doing lots of things with Polly, and Polly's been here to talk with me before a few years ago. But I will tell you, as a white person, I was really feeling really good about myself, that I had done so many things for the black community. Not just that, but other things. And we ran the Illumination Project to bring citizens and police together. I mean, it was all kinds of work that we were doing. And I thought I was exempt from the historical aspect. And when this DNA test came out in 2018, I was like, oh.
So, I need to take my DNA test to see.
Yes, you do. You're likely cousin.
Yes. One of the things that we discovered as we prepared for this and talked is just how many points of intersection we have. After George Floyd was murdered, I started working with a group called Blue Courage, and it's a police training group. And we decided to do a sort of a video series where we would interview some of the top cops that were sort of more proponents of community-police relations. A number of those police leaders were eventually fired because they were too much ahead of their time. A number of them were women. And then doing police training on the ground. And I was always struck by the idea of how a lot of this work is about helping people to see differently, how to step up and lead differently. Because when you're inside structures, it's easy to give way and become a sheep. It's a lot harder to sort of step up and become that leader, that agent of change. And that whole sort of vision of how do you unlock courage and allow people to get over their guilt.
So I just wanted to tell y'all that when I cannot thank Janet enough, I'll be indebted to you forever for connecting Robert and me. We both did the same thing when we found out we were working with search for each other on the internet. And we found out that we've basically been in the same field, profession. And that is leadership, change management, working with police and communities. It's like, how can this be that we have this much in common? And you were born in Maine, right? I mean, come on. I'm definitely not talking to you. I mean, I think this is why Robert and I were so excited about today. Because we both realize that when you are fortunate enough to have an education and experience that a lot of people don't have, that when this kind of complexity and conflict and difficult situations arise, we can stand up. Not everybody can stand up. It's easier for people like you and me to do that. I mean, I can't teach people how to be great leaders for 25 years and then have this opportunity to lead and sit down, right? And so when I found this out, I had a choice to make. I could either hide it or I could voice it. And if I didn't voice it, then I was basically going to be a hypocrite. And that's one thing that I don't ever want to be called in my lifetime. So I went on and I started researching. And not only could you find you on the internet, we found the people off the list that my grandmother had written. And one was a very wealthy merchant who moved here, John Torrance, Torrans. And he was a very wealthy merchant in Charleston, lived on East Bay Street, had a big house near the Payne-ful. And when I found an abstract about him at the College of Charleston, South Carolina Historical Society collection, it had a comment about him saying that he had done this and done that, and he'd also brought hundreds and hundreds of Africans to Charleston, captive Africans. And at this point, my husband and I were attending the daughter church of Mother Emanuel, and there were only 5 people of European descent in the entire congregation. And it's a historic church, just like Mother Emanuel. And I was like, oh my God, how many of these people in this church with us and our church family have had their ancestors sold by my people, right? And some of my black friends said, well, Margaret, I don't know that we're getting far. This could get worse. And I'm like, well, I've got to look, I've got to know. And during the Illumination Project with the police department in Charleston, one of the things that we did was we had historians teach Charleston's and South Carolina's history to that police department, because a lot of police officers come, they don't know anything about South Carolina, they don't know anything about Charleston. So I had gotten to know some of the most renowned historians in Charleston, so I immediately started drawing on them. And so they said, oh yeah, you got to keep looking. And so what we found was my 4th great-grandfather, William Payne, that's John Torrance' son-in-law, who came from Ireland. So I thought I was German, but I'm really obviously Irish. He came from Ireland in 1786 with one of the signers of the U.S. Constitution from South Carolina named Pierce Butler. And basically, he was known as a vendue master, which means public outcry, he was an auctioneer. And he went bankrupt in 1803 in Charleston, and he went back to the business that he had done back in 1789. He went back to that business in 1803, full-time in the domestic slave trade. So I spent my summer 2018 looking at ads online through Redex News Bank, which is the online database through our library. And the South Carolina Room librarians are just amazing to me, as was Dr. Hitler. And so I documented through 1,100 historical newspaper ads that William Payne and his 2 sons, or 2 of his sons, over a 30-year career on Broad Street, if you know where Broad Street is in the historic district in Charleston, I documented that they sold 9,268 people in the domestic slave trade. So to make sure everybody's on the same page, these are not captive Africans from Africa. These are people who are here, living here for generations, raising their families, living with their families for generations. And he was quite wealthy.
how did, once you discovered all of this, how did you sort of deal with it? Because I know one of your key ideas in the book is that you can't change the past, but you can change what people can learn about it and what they can do about it. How have you reconciled that sort of both, you know, like looking at that history and seeing it sort of downside and transform that into a positive?
Well, I think that's where the consulting training comes in. I mean, I'm just doing what I knew how to do. I'm just applying it to my own system and my community system and my state system and my country system. So, you know, I thought it'd be really important for people to see things that they ordinarily wouldn't have seen. So while I can't change the past, I'm right now changing what you learn about it, yes. And based on what you learn, you can choose to do something differently now to make things better for all of us. So this is an ad, which was really kind of surprising to me, that you could not only sell people back in the early 1800s, you could rent them. So why? So of course I had no idea, since I'm not an academic, I'm not a historian. So the historians told me, they said, well, this capitalistic system of slavery had to have its tentacles as far as it possibly could to stand strong. So if, I'll use my husband Bob for an example, Bob could afford to buy somebody, I could rent him somebody, and now he has a benefit of this system, this business system. So he's less likely to what? Be against it, right? So they could rent, they could sell, we could use you for a mortgage. If you didn't pay your property tax on time, the sheriff, here's the next one. The sheriff is going to come to your house. This could be inside, in the city, or it could be out on the plantation. The sheriff would show up, and he would take some of your people to pay off your tax lien, and he would get the people to William Payne and his sons, and he would sell them and get a percentage. Plus, William Payne had to pay an auctioneer's fee to the state of South Carolina of 2.5% of his gross revenues every year. I mean, these are just things that we don't, I mean, I don't know about y'all. How many of y'all are born and raised in South Carolina? How many? Do y'all remember a South Carolina history book that had a picture of the state capitol on it? It was by Mary Sims Oliphant. Well, my friend Missy McClure, who lives here in Charleston, suggested that I find that. And what I learned was the history that I had in the 7th grade really didn't cover any of this. Slavery was only mentioned 17 times, I think it was, and it's not even a chapter title. So how can I know anything else? One of the things that I wanted to say too, and I may be on track, I know you'll bring me back. This thing about taking action. In order to take action on new information and feel compelled to do something today requires a readiness, an emotional readiness. And I want you to know that I was honored to be a part of the 1984 class of Leadership South Carolina. That's a long time ago, right? And what this would do, what the program does, it takes about 50 people from across the state, they put you through this program, you go to different parts of the community, learn about South Carolina, and they want you to stay in South Carolina, and they want you to be a leader in South Carolina. That's the whole purpose of it. So I was like 31 years old. And we went down to Defusky Island. And I'd never even hardly heard of Defusky, right? And they built Hay Point, and Melrose had just built the clubhouse. And we met over there in this, we went to Pat Conroy's schoolhouse, and some lady was selling us Del Crabs. I mean, it was very real. And we met this man, one of our speakers for the session was this man named Emory Campbell. This is 1984. And he's talking about this place called the Penn Center, which of course I'd never heard of. And he said it was near Beaufort, which I had heard of that. And then he said something about, some social experiment down there, not being the Confederacy, and I thought, well, he must be wrong. And I had a master's degree at that point. I've been out of graduate school 4 years. Somehow that didn't soak into me. Somehow I couldn't hear a truth that was different from what I thought was true. So I'm giving you all grace today to maybe not be ready for all of the truths that I'm sharing. Because I've only been able to expand my capacity truly since the Mother Emanuel Massacre.
Wow. Recognizing a lot of folks in this room, I know there are, and having been here, I guess now 17, 18 months now, I know that this is an active community, that the fight against racism, the fight for equality, the fight to illuminate sort of a more interracial history of Beaufort County is strong. And but I would be remiss if, as we wind down before questions, if I didn't give you a chance to sort of talk more about the blueprint that you lay out on page 107. And it's almost, you do this blueprint that's kind of a blueprint for healing and transformation on page 107. And it's almost a manifest of action for white people. And I'd like to talk more about that.
So page 107 is the meat of the book. The book is about my story, and as you know, there's also art in it, right? Thanks to John W. Jones. 34 of the 43 pieces out there with ads, there are 43 in the book. And I think that the power of this book is that it is both story and art, right? So the arts can support the story in a way that the written word is sort of sterile. So just so y'all know, there's this thing, and Bob's going to kill me for saying this, there's this thing called a polarity map. And this book is based on 2 poles in a polarity, and one is I want people to acknowledge historical realities and consequences. I can't change it. I didn't do it, right? And on the other hand, see what you can do now to make things better for all of us in the future. So if you were to look at the map that I used to create this book, which the book is not about the map, I'm just telling you inside scoop, okay? On page 107 are parts of the map that was my roadmap for what I'm trying, not I and hundreds of other people are trying to achieve with this book. Because what I want is, I want white people to open your eyes, not get poked in the eye. I think that's really important, right? This is loving, this isn't punishment. Accept the full history of what's happened as historical facts. Assure yourself that you're not responsible, you didn't do it. And you're responsible for what happens now. And I think the key thing here is to develop in yourself an empathy, and maybe a newfound empathy, for what African Americans and their ancestors have suffered in this country, and why so many of their descendants harbor resentment and anger. Not judge it, just understand it. I grew up in the country club of Charleston. And it wasn't until 3 years ago that I knew that the country club of Charleston was part of a cloud plantation. So Lord knows what went on under the footprint of my home. My hope is that we as white people allow the past to inform our future actions, take responsibility for what happens now and going forward, and ask African Americans how we can take action, how to change to support them. Ask them, how can we help? What can we do to change? And feel empowered to take the first step to build a multiracial effort to ensure a country that works for all people. now since the book, since I've been doing this work, I realized that white people weren't the only people I needed to talk to. Because they're two sides of the coin, right? So I added another section here, and so my hope is that that Americans of African descent accept our apology for what they've had to experience living as Black in America, that African Americans let go of the responsibility to educate white people. Please consider acting as our guide. Also allow our present actions to inform your future actions. Be open to our first steps and some well-intentioned missteps. And finally, take a calculated risk with us and lessen any resentment and distrust for a better alternative of harmony.
I think that laying out that sort of roadmap for transformation, for harmony, that takes the grace, that requires grace, but it also requires faith in a certain way. And that's one of the other things that I was struck by your book, is that it's so steeped in faith, and it is so illuminated by love. And those two things together, as you like to quote about Dr. King, that, we may have come on different boats, but we're in the same boat now. And I think as we're going to inhabit that same boat, we need to inhabit it with love and faith. And faith that tomorrow's going to be better, that we don't have to be victims of our past, that we're inheritors of the past, but even those things left the stage for what I think is an evolving experiment of democracy and togetherness that can set the stage for the rest of the world, a model. And so with that, I think we probably should turn on to a few questions.
I think that's great. And I want to just, that's a marker that we put on Broad Street. So if we're working in Charleston to demarcate the domestic slave trade zone, which no one ever knew when people were being sold into buildings. This is not museums. These are commercial buildings. I just want to tell you, if you're from New York, you're part of the issue too. This is about, I felt sympathy as a child, empathy. And then the book is for sale out there by the Beaufort bookstore. And what we are doing is, where we go locally, we try and let the bookstores benefit financially. Because books are important. And so supporting our local bookstores and working with Bruce Page is just phenomenal. So please stop by. The book has been subsidized by lots of people in Charleston. We got a big team. It's only $32.95, which is a really great deal for a book like this. So support, buy two, buy one as a gift, and please be in our circle of influence. Please join our circle of influence. It's critical that we all show up and then take it to someone that nobody else in this room can touch.
Thank you. I wonder if we can put it back on that empathy, sympathy thing, let that be in the background as we think about it. And again, this book is Low Country Genius. And I'm just still struck by and continue to go back to it again and again to reflect and think through and allow myself to think about the way forward.
I'm just so honored that you had the book before Janet called you, and Bob, they have the book at the Penn Center. So if you want to support the Penn Center, stop by the Penn Center and buy a copy too.
So now we can open it up to questions. And we've only, I would have to say that, like, in some ways I feel very efficient now, because this book is, like I say, chock full of things. It is such a rich journey, and I feel like our conversation, I think we would need like 10 hours of really talking about this book to really, maybe an hour hour a page or hour a chapter, because this is, so definitely pick it up and think through it. But do we have any questions?
Or comments?
Or comments?
Do we have a microphone out here? Is Tammy back there?
She's not back here, but
I don't need it. I have a very big voice.
yes.
I found it amazing that in the advertisement of Mr. Payne, it said that the person being sold was warranted, guaranteed. You think about appliances being guaranteed and having warranties. You do not think about people. So that was very moving.
That is, I will tell you, when I spent 2018 for 3 months looking at these ads, it would be like a fist that come out of the computer screen and just hit me. And one of the ads I didn't bring today is where it's an estate of somebody down in Colleton County. And it was a silver pencil case, 6 teaspoons, 6 tablespoons, an aged Negro man, and a young Negro. There's also another one, a different one. Furniture, and this is the ad, furniture and Negroes for sale.
In some ways, behind these advertisements are biographies. There are nuances, for example. So, for example, with the rentals of enslaved people, the rentals were done where African Americans could actually get a portion of that, so that they could put their money together to buy themselves out of enslavement. And so there's all these sort of rich contradictions and nuances that come out of these advertisements. And to think about, you know, as I read the advertisement and I think about who did that become, and then what role did they play later? You know, in terms of, you know, like when I think about somebody like Charlotte, and I think about how their family came out of enslavement a few generations before her, and then what does she do with her freedom? And how is she shaped by it, and how does she, in turn, shape the nation? So I think that I'm just really struck by both, you know, disheartened and hurt by those things, but also want to know more and want to know how all these stories come together for the American mosaic.
It's complicated, and as long as we choose to be Americans, we can deal with it, right? I mean, we can literally address it. I worked in conflict resolution for almost 30 years, and I will tell you, if you avoid conflict, y'all ever played that game Whack-A-Mole? You know what I'm talking about? It's popping up somewhere else. And so the way this is written, I mean, I had Gestalt psychologists look at the book, I had historians prove the facts, the psychologists looked at it to make sure that the book was written in a way that didn't create resistance to people hearing the message and wanting to be motivated to do something. So it's an invitational kind of thing. So talking about it personally, working with John W. Jones has just been such a gift. We have a good friend who, in common, Chuma Wukike, who owns Chuma Art Gallery down in the city market in Charleston. And we had a 70th birthday party at number 1 Broad Street, and we bought out the whole restaurant, because you only turn 70 once. And we intentionally invited, we could have 45 people, half are white, half are black. And I stood up and I spoke and I said, look, we're having this lunch today to show that while my 4th great-grandfather was selling people directly across the street, that we can in fact learn to trust each other, respect each other, be friends with each other, and move forward together. And so Chuma was at the lunch, and he called Mr. Jones and he goes, I think you might be interested in these ads that this lady has. So it's like, yeah, so we met, and Mr. Jones who is a nationally acclaimed artist in his own right from his first book, Color of Money, or Confederate Currency, The Color of Money. Mr. Jones could not sleep. He painted non-stop for this book for like 6 months. And all these images, we're all on the same team. I mean, just like we wrote this book, he's part of the book. I mean, there's no charge for the paintings. No one owns those paintings. They're on this collection. They're for all of us, Chuma and Bob and Mr. Jones and me, to show people so that people can see the people. They weren't just newspaper ads. These were people, and these were people living in families. One of them out there is The Three Generations, which is one of my favorites, and it's a grandmother, her children, and grandchildren being separated at a sale. And I just ask folks, I mean, maybe you have children, maybe you have grandchildren, and just imagine they've lived with you forever, and the person who owns you dies, boom, you'll never see him again. So what do y'all think is the earliest age that a little enslaved boy can be sold? What do you think is the earliest age that a little enslaved boy can be sold? Away from his family. Pardon?
Post-weaning.
Actually later, 8 years old. Because that's when they could be fully productive. Although I have seen one ad where it was an ad for a boy who was a tailor. He was 10 years old. And it said he'd been in the trade 5 years, and he was 10 years old. So he was 5 when he started being a tailor. I mean, I think the beauty of the art is that it shows people, in no uncertain terms, who we have to thank for building the low country, the state, and the country.
I think this all comes out of your humility, that you were able to.
Can y'all grab us a microphone, please?
I think this really has come out of your humility, that you've been able to embrace this story. And I wonder, had your early life been of the knowledge of your family having owned all these slaves and slaves, how you would have been different. How the story, would you have the same humility that you had to embrace this and try to.
Would I have the same humility? No.
Yeah.
No, as a matter of fact, I took a leadership feedback survey when I worked for SCE&G back in the late 80s, a 360 leadership survey. And my husband said I had been a legend in my own mind. Arrogance was the way that I was, and it wasn't until I got that in 1992, I guess, that it was my wake-up call about how arrogant I am. So I've been working on this for a long time. So thank you. Humility is not a word that I could imagine anybody ever using to describe me, so thank you. How much do I owe you?
Founding fathers, there was Jefferson, Monroe, Madison, Jackson, and popular presidents. They like to think about all people are created equal, and established English law was against slavery. How could they justify that in their mind?
So you're asking, how did they justify it in their mind?
Slavery.
So one of the things I want to say, and I apologize because as a history guide here, I kind of take a lot of things for granted. we didn't really talk about what Penn Center is and how it started and what it is today. And in many ways, I think that could help people understand.
Yeah, so Penn Center started as missionaries came down from the north. That story is always told, you know, Ellen Murray, Laura Town. But I think that some of the part of the story that's kind of undersold is the way that local people here played a big part in that, both white and black that were from here, and the ways in which, and so that's 1862 that Penn Center started. It was part of a lot of experiments to sort of process and negotiate a post-enslavement future. And I think that what I like about, well, not like, I'm always struck by the idea that folks could write down something that's a brighter ideal than they actually practice, that they actually signed off on, right? But that's the hope and that's the belief, I think, that freedom, you know, like Stanley Kraft once wrote that nobility doesn't have an address. It shows up where it wants to show up. And I believe that freedom is the same thing, that one can try to, and sometimes spirit moves us to do things that we're incapable of doing at a particular moment, right? So that sometimes we plant a seed, we talked about this earlier, we plant a seed, and then we later benefit from the harvest in ways in which we didn't even understand. And so I think that for some reason, enslavement was a part of our history. I think it helps to shape us if we can think about all the ways in which it gave birth to the Harriet Tubmans, it gave birth to the Frederick Douglasses, it gave birth to the Martin Kings, the Septima Clarks. In some ways, I was once in a classroom in Canada, and they were doing a project, and the project failed, he said, and there was a third grade class, and one of the little boys was taunting, I think he was sweet on this young lady, he said, that failed, and she said, it's not a failure if you learn something from it. And I think that's our journey, is to both learn from our cultural past, and to those founders, those founding men, they were really standing behind a bunch of unsung founding men and women of a lot of different colors. And I can say this as a descendant of enslaved people that were on Washington's plantation. I have relatives on my maternal side from all 13 colonies that ended their slavery in the 1700s. And then on the paternal side, they were the beneficiaries of Juneteenth. They were some of the last people in this country that were liberated. And so I sit with that. And I even sit with the idea of my grandmother was a sharecropper in East Texas. And I wanted to ask her, when you go past those dead cotton fields, what do you think about it? And I expected her to talk about the toil, the backbreaking work. And she said, I remember how beautiful the flowers were. I remember our time together. And so I think our task is to look to the bright side, lean into the promise, recognize we're not where we want to be, and keep it moving forward.
We have a number of other hands up. Is there anybody else who?
Way in the back, yes. Well, you're the one I'm looking at. Right there.
I love this thing that was said. To take action requires emotional readiness. And in that frame, I wonder about reparations from the standpoint of the United Nations and it having many different aspects, one of which is a promise of non-repeat, another is restitution, compensation, and I forget the other two, I'm sorry. Might there be, I'm wondering what the panel, both of you might have to say about that topic, in addition to seeing that there were people and their descendants are most likely not living on the country club.
So, personally, I think that reparations is a powerful idea. But I also think that it's about investing in the future of us as a people, of us as a community together. The Guardian newspaper, in 2023, in March, discovered that its co-founders had used profits from enslaved people on St. Helena and other sea islands, including Jamaica and Brazil as well, to start the newspaper. So they've started a £10 million reparations fund, and they're trying to figure out how they make amends for that. And I think it's important. But I think that social capital is so much more of a force multiplier and a transformative agent than money. I think that we shouldn't allow ourselves to just stop at money, because then I think in some ways we repeat the sins where everything is commodified. When the ideals that we're talking about transcend the marketplace. And we have to always remember that.
So what we learned through the Illumination Project after the Mother Emanuel Massacre is that it's about relationships, and that's what changes things. It changes people's access to things. So we focus a lot on relationships and doing things that might be seen small, but they're personal, right? And then on the other hand, Bob and I both endowed scholarships, both at the Trident Technical College and at the 1967 Legacy Program at the College of Charleston, which is the year that the College of Charleston was integrated, and it actually sent scholarships for African American students to go there. So we're sort of doing both. I think the first step is, I think if you write somebody a check, if I write somebody a big check, I say, oh, well, I'm done. And if I wrote you a big check, you go, we're done. And we don't want that. We want to connect.
The end that you're so.
It is that and.
Yes, yes.
Are you all willing to take two more questions? Okay, let's go. Right, on the table. Yeah, stand up, or speak loud.
Sorry. Margaret, I really loved your comment about the power of bringing the story together with the art. I think that's what makes the book so amazing. And I wonder if there's been any thought given to making prints of the artwork that would be available to people. And I have one other question. Do you plan to do any more research along these lines that you said?
Please don't have me do any more research. I've had some people try and hook me. I'm trying to stay away from it. This is my mission now, is to bring people together. I'm past the research phase. Now I do find out everything. There will not be any prints, although when Bob and I travel and we don't have the exhibition with us, we have 4 cliche prints that Chuma made for us. There are 14 pieces. I had to get Mrs. Jones to stop painting. Mrs. Jones had to make him stop painting. There are 14 paintings that aren't in the exhibition, that are not in the book, and they're all going to be shown for the very first time on March the 5th at the International African American Museum, when we present on March the 5th there in Charleston. And those will be for sale with the ads. So if people are interested in that we're trying to keep this sacrosanct until the traveling exhibition stops. That's sort of our commitment right
One more question.
From a leadership standpoint, I think when you are working with the police department, you want to get to some point. What I'm hearing from both of you is that there is no end game. And this goes on forever. Well, might it be a good idea to make amends out of the discussion? And just, or reparations, and just talk about helping everyone. Because, you know, a rising tide lifts all the boats. So I think those two words possibly could do more to divide than to unite. And just so there's no question, Paul and I have a daughter who's married to a woman who we adore, who don't look nothing like us. And it's a wonderful relationship. So I'm just curious, and if you were going to give this talk at Meharry, Tennessee State, would it be any different?
now. The thing that's going to stop this train is when my health gets too bad. That's something that I know that's going to stop it. Can we reconfigure what our process is or our approach? Yes. Right now, what I know about change, and I worked in change for a long time, is that if you want change to occur, you need to have a core nucleus, and then it cascades out. And so South Carolina is where we're working right now. So my first interest is not going to speak at some academic institution, because then they would take it academically. This is not academic stuff. This is real world. And this is something that each of us can do something about. I mean, Bob and I are the minority in black spaces probably 3 times a week. I mean, Bob said, I think we've crossed over, right? I mean, it's like, you know, we've been so immersed in the black community for 10 years. And so what I'm going to invite you to do is, don't think about writing a check tomorrow. I'm not asking you to write a check. Maybe you go into a space, maybe it's, what's the name of the church there? Let's see, what's the name of the church? Where Hodges is. What's this church? Tabernacle. Maybe you go to Tabernacle or First African that's just a couple blocks from your house. Go to their services and get to understand the services. Go make friends with somebody and invite them over to your home. Go into spaces where you're not, I think it's so important. We lived in Minneapolis for 4 winters. It is so important to know what it's like being a minority, and I understood that. Because everybody that I met said, oh, you have an accent. I said, so do you. So I think the first step for empathy is, in fact, looking for how you can stand in somebody else's shoes. And we are given, let's let Dr. Adams have the last word.
Yeah, I think that love, grace, forgiveness, those are the things that real leadership leads with. Because in the end, a lot of the bad things that happen in life come from a place of fear and come from a place of not knowing the other. And so anytime that you can create a bridge, you open up the possibility for discovering kindred spirits, 6 degrees of separation, and consensual agendas, right? And so I think that's anytime I go into a change space, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking to speak through, and this is made by anthropology, because this is, as an anthropologist, when you try to get into a space, you have to try to you're an outsider. So, and that outsider quality has dangers with it. And so you have to figure out how to speak the local idiom and how to see through the local idiom. You know, when I started working I used to live in the Dominican Republic, and I would go down to the corner where a lot of the information was exchanged. Well, at that corner, people would take one cup and some rum, and that cup would pass around to everybody. You know, that's not generally how I drink rum. Right. But I had to figure out how to drink rum that way in that moment, because otherwise the conversation was about how it's too good to drink that rum versus what I had come to research. And I think that's the same thing about change, that as a change facilitator, that you meet people where they are and you lift up their experiences and try to read through their experiences to help them see that they're already involved